building a culture in which people at every level of an organization see reputation, both building it and, more importantly, protecting it as everyone's job.
Welcome to the Smart Talk series, the show for professionals who want strategies, tips, and real talk about all things PR, marketing, and social media. Your host is Melissa Vella-Williamson, an award-winning, accredited, and nationally recognized PR pro and communication thought leader. And now your host, Melissa Vella-Williamson.
Hello and welcome to the Smart Talk series. I'm Melissa Vella-Williamson. This season, our focus is on valuing advice and taking action. Today, for our season finale, I'm talking with Jon Goldberg. Jon Goldberg founded Reputation Architects in 2009 after more than 25 years as an advisor to top executives and boards and working as a senior leader at some of the world's most prominent communications firms. Trained as a journalist, Jon is a frequent speaker, author, and media commentator at the intersection of risk, reputation, culture, and technology, including building organizational immunity to crisis, countering disinformation, the psychology of online trolling, communicating on polarizing social issues, and the role of artificial intelligence in stoking and potentially reversing incivility and online hate. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, Melissa, great to see you.
I'm so glad to talk with you. I can't even believe in 2026 you have a minute to talk with us, so we're going to jump into it. Tell us more about your background and what you're up to today.
Well, my background, I was born at a young age. My background from a PR perspective is actually fairly typical. Trained as a journalist originally, worked at it very briefly. I had this altruistic dream that I alleviate the ills of society through my writing. That lasted until I discovered my personal aversion to poverty, mainly my own. And really happenstance, I landed an internship at a major insurance company around that time, the biggest in the country at the time, wound up staying 6 years. And that's really where I cut my crisis teeth. From there, I moved from the corporate side to the agency side, first at J. Walter Thompson, spent 11 years at Edelman, most of that running the North American crisis litigation and corporate issues practice. I ran corporate affairs and crisis at Porter Novelli for 5 years. And, if you remember around 2008, the depth of a global economic catastrophe just felt like a really good time to be an entrepreneur. And that's when I started Reputation Architects 17 years ago. And really the common thread through it all, as you know, has really been crisis and reputation risk work.
Hi, I'm Katie Duke, and I've been a nurse for over 20 years. Listen, I used to think that I was my most stylish in my 20s, but honestly, style and confidence only get better with age. And that is why I love Figs. These scrubs are beautiful, comfortable, and they are built to last. They're not those boxy, scratchy uniforms that we all started out in. No. These fit perfectly. They feel amazing, and the quality is just wow! My favorite color? Burgundy. It's chic, it's timeless, and it's even the same color as my apartment, because I'm kind of obsessed with it. And I love adding custom embroidery to make my scrubs as personal as my style. And since I work in telehealth, my embroidered figs even double as my ID badge. It's never too late to reinvent yourself or your scrubs. Get 15% off your first order at wearfigs.com with the code FIGSRX. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSRX for 15% off your first order.
A Mochi moment from Sadie, who writes, I'm not crying, you're crying. This is what I said during my first appointment with my physician at Mochi, because I didn't have to convince him I needed a GLP-1. He understood, and I felt supported, not judged. I came for the weight loss and stayed for the empathy. Thanks, Sadie. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Sadie is a Mochi member compensated for her story.
Yeah, I feel like in my what am I now? 24 years into public
I
relations.
stopped counting.
Right. That part of our work has done nothing but exploded compounded,
Hmm.
doubled up. I don't even know how to, put the math around that these days. But what was seemed to be a specialty, which is very lucrative if you can stand the stress and pressure and the emotions of it. It seemed to be just a commonplace discipline within all public relations and I would say marketing work these days. It's a quite a busy time for crisis comms and reputation management. What
Definitely.
special Yeah, so which part, right? And I don't know if this is a chicken and egg comparison, John, but like is crisis communication harder to manage these days than reputation management, or how are you seeing that?
Mm. To me, it's really a distinction without a difference, whether you call it crisis communications or crisis management, or in some circles and subspecialties, it becomes risk communication or reputation management. They really come down to, what I see as just this fascinating and swirling brew of disciplines. It's a little bit risk, it's a lot actually risk management, it's organizational psychology, it's business strategy, it's decision science, and I always say that there's kind of an element of religion to it as well. And I say religion only partly in jest. There's an element of it that is kind of the sanctity of the confessional, if you will. We hear all sorts of things and, never talk about them because the best crisis is the one nobody ever hears about. You've heard that
Yeah.
before. There's an aspect of kind of personal and spiritual counseling. And of course, there's no shortage of people taking the Lord's name in vain in difficult situations. So it's all this bucket and trying to say, oh, this is more important right now than that. It's really looking at things in a holistic way, and we wear many hats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that brew that I see and we grapple with sometimes with clients is this is not a communication issue. It is more of an operational issue, or, to your point, like a behavioral issue. This is a people problem. This is a you problem, leader, right? And I think some of those are the hardest situations to manage because the best and shiniest and most poetic writing and messaging and communication will never clean up or cover up for really bad operations or people behavior. And that
Right.
part of it really is hard to get people to really look at sometimes. I see a lot of head in the sand kind of management, if you will.
Hmm.
And I just wonder,
Yeah.
like, aren't you choking down there? Aren't you suffocating a little bit?
Yeah, it's and that's why when I say it's a fascinating brew of things like risk management, organizational psychology, strategy, decision science, the one thing I didn't just mention is communication, because more often than not, I find I am having the conversations I am having are about the business, about what the client does, about how they operate. It's Communication is secondary to that. And one thing I always do when we get a new crisis or a new piece of business, once we get started, I always like to go back and say, hey, what was it, if you talk to other advisors, if you talk to big agencies, what was it that tipped things in our favor? And often what I hear it, and I just heard this about a week ago, somebody said, well, you were recommended, and we had an hour-long conversation in which we did not talk about PR at all. In that case, it was a rural health system. We were talking about the challenges of rural health, chronically underfunded Medicaid reimbursements. We were talking about physician recruitment. We were talking about patient leakage and the economic pressures which were driving the situation that they and other health systems in their rural area were navigating. You know, Being able to have that level of conversation is just so central to what we do, because ultimately it's not communication that will drive the strategy. It's going to be the business.
Right. Right. What are you actually going to do that we can communicate about and help you
Exactly.
share? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I feel like that is in some cases the most satisfying, but also challenging part of this type of work is because some clients, the best clients, they want to go there. They want to have these productive conversations, even if it hurts, even if it's embarrassing, if even if they feel
Mhm.
sometimes ashamed that they didn't anticipate something or plan for something or better protect against something, but they're willing to do the work to make it right, make it better. And there's
Yes.
other clients where you're like, "Oh, you knew exactly what was going
Mhm.
on." Not my clients, let's be clear. But
Yeah.
there's others that they knew exactly what they were doing and what they were not doing, and they were just hoping the problems wouldn't pop up or come out.
Mhm.
And and for me, that's part of, one of the features that becomes most stressful in this type of work, while it's highly skilled and specialized and disciplined because of that, like the actual exhaustion that can come from this work is a lot. So how do you manage your own well-being, John? I mean, we were just on camera and I was like, you look great, you look healthy. Like, how do you manage your own well-being while clients' needs can really be around the clock in this work?
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, it kind of helps that I was born without an off switch. That's kind of, my congenital defect. I don't have downtime. I am always on for something, for better or worse. And I learned over the years that my well-being, both emotional and physical, is grounded in and really a byproduct of being able to help others, being able to help organizations and leaders and select individuals navigate stressful, sometimes even just unspeakable events and situations that not just in business, but they affect their lives and the lives of the people around them. And how I manage and modulate kind of my emotions is central to that. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. Was working a number of years ago. It's a long time technology client in Silicon Valley, um, and I would work. They'd have me come in. We'd work on site whenever there was something going on. And one day, the CEO walked in and kind of pulled me out of the conference room, and I probably worked with them through, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, a dozen crises of different descriptions. And he said, you know, been meaning to talk to you about this, but our team has noticed that the worst things seem to get around here. The worst things seem to them, and the more agitated people get, the calmer you seem to become. And he kind of paused and he said, and that really pisses us off. And I said, tell me about that. He said, well, it kind of, at first we had the sense you just weren't getting it or weren't taking it seriously. How can you be so calm at a time like this? And then over time, as we continue to work together, they realized that my ability to modulate my emotions and use those to adjust the temperature in the room and actually guide people's emotions and how they are dealing with things, that is really central in so many respects to what we do. So being able to control my emotions and keep them in check, which doesn't mean, for some people that may mean I need to sign off for a week every month or, 2 weeks every quarter. That's just not me. But being able to understand and modulate where I'm coming from in trying to lead people down, hopefully, a better, healthier, safer, reputationally and otherwise path, that's really what keeps me grounded.
I love that. That's certainly a gift, and I think that you are well suited then for this work because you can be like a thermometer and you can kind of set that temperature up or bring it down, right? Just based on
Mhm.
how you react and your composure around it.
Absolutely.
There's a small like coffee table book called The Coffee Bean, and we'll link it in the show notes. But I really liked it because it was like a former prisoner wrote this little story that he'd heard from another prisoner who was kind of mentoring him and saying, you can react to everything around you, basically, right? When you're in hot water, you can react and have that change you, or you can be like a coffee bean and change the whole environment, something to that nature. But you're reminding me of that because I was sharing that story with my children, because we often talk about we can't control everything around us or what's happening. We can only control our reaction to it. And so obviously you have mastery over that, which is really important to this work. And if you know John, his brain's always running, his sarcasm's always on, and I think that can be be really helpful in these times where you just need a little bit of cool humor to kind of get you to the next piece of conversation when things are really rough like that, and you're kind of going moment to moment. So
And and
I,
and sometimes just that psychic break of being able to chuckle at something, being taken by surprise by something you didn't expect someone to say, that can just change the mood, the tone, and it's kind of a cerebral reset,
yeah.
if you will. And when you do that, the conversation shifts. Whoever you're talking to gets a little more grounded, a little less anxious, perhaps. And, sometimes I do that deliberately, but more often than not, it just happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the part of work that John does, everyone is kind of like like the ER doctors or ER nurses, right? That come in, like they're like, "Oh, this is for someone else. This might make them completely panic and fall apart." For John, it's just another day in the ER. So the PR
Yeah,
ERs.
well, it's funny you mentioned that because I was thinking about this earlier as I was was getting ready for this conversation. How often have you heard someone say, "Oh, don't take it so seriously. It's PR, not ER." Well, in
Right.
the world I work in, it's much more ER than PR.
Absolutely.
And so I'm always the one who's saying, well, I beg to differ. PR is PR,
Yeah,
but there's a line where the complexity and the ability to recognize patterns of symptoms and diagnose what's going on. I'm going down a medical metaphor here. How to treat the wound without inadvertently killing the patient is way closer to what we see on the pit every Thursday than what we read in a PR textbook.
Yeah, I agree, because there are times, I mean, especially during COVID, many of us and many communicators who really didn't even get close to some of the work that you do, John, all of a sudden we're very important, vital, essential communicators, and we're dealing with a life threatening situation, whether they prepared for it or not. And so I think that gave us kind of a glimpse of, wow, this can be very serious work. And it can, and it does impact lives depending on what you do and how you do it. So,
Absolutely.
especially,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So I think it's really important that we bring that up too. And so it is truly, right, a gift that you have to be able to tackle those tough situations and topics, and then being able to guide others through it, and especially when it has to do with very vital business operations or organizational situations that are quite complex. And I was wondering, because reading through your bio, I mean, you certainly worked at big agencies and companies before you opened Reputation Architect, which I love the name. What did you learn from those roles and experiences that you feel like really applied to what you do today, or even when you started, that gave you that kind of inspiration to start out on your own?
The I would point to all of the lessons I took away about how to manage people in teams. I led large teams. I've led small teams. I've led centralized teams. I've led decentralized teams. And a lot about how to do that effectively, how to build and run a business, which of course, Melissa, is a topic we talk about all the time as agency leaders, and also how to serve clients. And I would say that's an equally valuable mix of lessons about what to do, how to do those things, and also for me, how not to do them, how didn't want to do them when the decision was mine and I was starting Reputation Architects. And so those learnings, you know, the for better or worse, really shape how we work as a firm and how I work with clients and advise clients personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been the biggest gift of business ownership or leverage is that if you had an idea or system or strategy to make something better or different, more efficient, more substantial, you have the chance to do that. And you have the chance, like you're doing, John, to do the type of work that you feel like you're best suited for or interested in, passionate about, because people do react to that energy or, in John's case, lack of energy, uh, or
Oh,
emotional
come
energy.
on.
Yeah. No, you should see him get wound up, y'all. But, you know, the passion that you have for the work, right? The interest, the curiosity, like you said, John, like I'm also like-minded in that it's very hard for me to turn that part of myself off, right?
Right.
You put us
Mhm.
on a beach, we're still thinking about work in some way, and I think that's can be helpful to the profession for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So, John, in the work that you do as an agency owner, I mean, what type of clients, sectors, or industries do you typically serve? Do you see a pattern or trend there? Or has anything changed? And like, you're like, wow, Melissa, in the last few years, my typical client persona is quite different. Like, what does that look like for you?
It's really hard for me to point to any specialty in terms of industries or sectors or types of clients. It really runs the gamut. Nobody's immune to crisis these days. Everyone has an opportunity to be not just better prepared, but to be doing a better job of something we talk about all the time that kind of goes against conventional wisdom, and that is how do we not have crises? In the environment we're operating in now, a lot of people, I say that and people say, yeah, good luck with that. But this is something I've been talking about for a very long time. And, you know, in terms of industries, it really doesn't matter. It's whether we're getting a call from, a health and social services agency, a data analytics company, construction company that specializes in mega warehouses, in real estate, a rural healthcare client. There are certainly trends where sectors and industries go through periods of challenge. Huge right now for real estate, huge right now for healthcare, huge right now for data and any organization relying on cyber, which is everyone. But, beyond those patterns, really our work spans the gamut.
Yeah, I wondered if that changed for you, where you're seeing, well, it used to be, like you said, these areas, and now it's anybody, everybody, right? Which
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
makes, I would say the work um could be steady because of that, but it is unfortunate, right? And I think that's the part that I am grappling with, and a lot of pros we talk about because I would love to stay on that proactive prevention side and but even
Mhm.
personally, right, with AI being able to take our likenesses, our voices and whatnot, like questions you never even had before, like, well, gosh, does it matter that I have a podcast and my voice is being used on it right now? And what if someone,
Mhm.
Melissa's known for being this do-gooder in PR and someone takes it and like, please, I hope I'm not giving anyone ideas. But right, it's that wow, those things that the what ifs that we're used to training on that all of a sudden
Mhm.
start turning back and we're applying to ourselves and what we're doing every day, and it's a little alarming.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So, Definitely, John, if there's tips that you can give us, right? We're all for it because I think all of us are just wondering what haven't we thought about yet? Just a little bit more every day. And when I'm looking you up and I was like, okay, so much has really expanded in this space. I wonder, how John describes it, right, officially and on the website. Your website, I find you talk about the intersection of reputation, risk, culture, and technology. So tell us why that's your current topic, like lineup or
Mm.
intersection. Is that the big brew that's coming together that's making everything so
Yeah.
hard?
It's interesting, and I'm trying to think back of when I started describing kind of my practice, my focus in those terms. Look, reputation and risk are kind of the core threads throughout. But what are the principal drivers of reputation risk and reputational opportunity today? And see, Melissa, I'm not all doom and gloom. There is opportunity
Yay.
here. Despite what you may hear, I'm not all doom and gloom and evil. The predominant forces are cultural in the form of social and political and economic and demographic change, in the corrosion of civility and civil discourse, which is something I speak and write about a lot. People find that hard to believe from a guy who, true story, I broke my finger once and my team went around telling people I had been rendered half mute. Changing public expectations and beliefs around how organizations and leaders should behave. And then you have technology, and in particular AI. We need to be looking not just at the role of AI and technology and manufacturing and spreading disinformation and dividing communities and worse, but also as a positive force for change. I just wrote a paper that was just published on the corrosion of civility, and my goal was to lay out a playbook, not just of how AI is throwing jet fuel on a, fire of civility that has been burning for decades. It's not anything new. It's not tied to, any particular party or administration. It has been the decline of civility and the corrosion of civil discourse, which is so central to what we do, has been going on for so long. And there's so much talk and so much being written about how AI and algorithmic amplification, among other things, are contributing to that. But I also believe that the way to reverse those things lies in AI, at least to some great extent, if not totally. And that's one of the things that really has me excited these days.
Okay. Tell us more about that. Is that by feeding the LLMs with more civil copy? I mean, what exactly? Unpack that a
Well,
little bit for me.
not really. Let me give you one
Yeah.
example. One thing we developed fairly early on in the AI explosion is we started using large language models to give our clients sparring partners, if you will, a way to continually hone and practice their crisis skills, their decision-making skills, by actually engaging in a crisis simulation with a very smart and very dynamic large language model that we've created. So, we have a tool that we use with clients that allows someone to sit down, available 24/7. You no longer necessarily have to get 40 people in a conference room or on a Zoom to do a crisis tabletop exercise. Now you can have somebody sit down whenever they have time and inclination and run through a crisis simulation focused on their industry, on their role, on their level of crisis experience, but with a large language model that, as I said, we've created specifically with, lots of important guardrails in place, but also to provide a rich experience. Well, if you can practice dealing with how to respond to activists and how to respond to community violence in your community and demonstrations and political upheaval, you know what? And you can use a large language model to help you hone your messaging and practice how to put your messages together under pressure. Well, you can also use that same paradigm to help people discover and develop the skills to be able to disagree more effectively, be able to have more constructive conversations where there's always going to be an element of disagreement, but how can you have that conversation in a way that is going to be more constructive? And that's something you can also practice with a large language model. So, you see that comparison for every time somebody says, well, yeah, you can use a large language model to do this. I tend to be the one who looks at and says, well, if you can use it to do that, what about the 180-degree flip side opposite of that? How do we use it as a force? If that's a force, for bad, how do we use it as a force for good change?
Yeah, absolutely. I have let's see, it's a Gen Z and a Gen Alpha children. And so, I see all of it. And even I noticed today I was looking, some browser was up on an iPad, and I saw how my son was Googling a question into Google. It wasn't like, I'd still probably would use keywords or a phrase, right? And he's really into Beyblades. It's a spinning fighting top. It's low tech,
Hmm.
which is, kind of cool in today's world, right? But he
Right.
put in there like he was talking to Claude or an AI, tool saying, I've got 10 Beyblades, they're this is and this and this. How do I connect them to do such and such? And I'm like, he put that in Google? And I was really like, wow, okay. So this is just
Mhm.
a deeper type of conversation type tool they're using even the searches for, and which the searches, right, have adapted and evolved with some AI components as well. And then I turn around the other way and there's, my daughter using a VR game and having these chats. And I was like, man, so everything you're describing, John, I'm thinking, that sounds like a wonderful training tool and yet a scary, horrible, like VR game that we could play
Hmm.
and to figure out how to, deal with a press conference under pressure like that, right? When reporters are
Right.
emotional, upset, and asking a bunch of questions, or how would we put together? Because I've been in those spots where you're trying to write that just legally sound and don't get you in trouble, yet emotionally competent and culturally competent and caring enough, yet not legally giving away everything type of message under pressure. And it can be so much for our human brains when we have hearts too. So I think all the
Right.
training and all the tries are helpful, right?
Absolutely. And it's an opportunity to test
Yeah.
yourself. Because the beauty of a large language model is you can go through an exercise and you can say, let's go back and pick that up from this point, but what if the reporter asked this? Or what if I respond differently to that inquiry? What if I change my message? And you can pick it up from that point, and it will take you through and show you how the consequences of a particular message point or a particular course of action change depending on how you approach it.
Yeah.
And, much better to do that in the safety of your living room with a large language model than to do that live in the middle of a crisis.
Yeah. And to underline also what you're saying is that approach is proactive. And that is so
Exactly.
important. That is so important to what you're doing. And I think that's a great tip to share. In general, if you have a takeaway, it's plan for an issue, plan and try to prevent crises and plan to help yourself in these situations for sure as a pro.
Mhm.
What else do you wish PR pros understood about what you do, your specialty area?
You really just hit it. One in particular, conventional wisdom, and I have a serious allergy to conventional wisdom, as many people will tell you. Conventional wisdom says the best way to manage a crisis is to be ready with a plan, right? I mean, who hasn't heard that? Last time I checked, there were like 800 million pieces of content on Google saying the best way to manage a crisis is to have a plan. So it's got to be right. Well, I disagree. To me, traditional crisis planning has a major flaw, which is that it's based on a faulty assumption that crises are all inevitable. So having a plan is critical, don't get me wrong, but being ready with a plan and then waiting expectantly for an opportunity to use it and get some return on that investment, it's never made sense to me, because by that point the damage is already underway. So for me, being ready with a plan, second best way to manage a crisis. What's the best way? Don't have the crisis in the first place. And when I say that, and I say that often, I speak about this a lot, people are like, it's like a 2x4 upside the head. We never thought of that. How do we do that? So that is really a lot of the work we do, focusing on helping organizations build immunity to
Mm.
crisis, not just the plans. And this is really what I want more people to understand and think about and take away. And this is the way you do this is very tied to culture and building a culture in which people at every level of an organization see reputation, both building it and, more importantly, protecting it, as everyone's job. It's their job. It's the job of the person next to them. It's the job of, whoever may be in a position to notice something that's unusual and doesn't feel or smell right, and, raise the alarm instead of saying, oh, that's the responsibility of comms, or that's the C-suite's job, so they just ignore it. Lots of crises happen because everyone saw it. Everyone saw the early wisps of smoke, but everyone thought it was somebody else's job to sound the alarm. And changing that has among other missions, become one of mine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I know that in the school system we're at, they use see something, say something, right? But to your point, it's see something, right? Smell something, notice something, hear something. Like there's a lot of ways we can just kind of raise a flag and say, I'm not sure if this is much of anything, but it's just a little different than what I'm expecting to see or notice or a different interaction. And I think obviously that goes back to great leadership, great culture in organizations that say it's okay to say something that's hard or have that tough conversation or right to bring up an issue. I've certainly seen that where leaders they I was told that there was a certain leader I worked with one time like don't rain on their parade, Melissa. I'm like it's kind of my job. Like I'm just supposed to plan for that rain, right? I'm supposed to
Right.
mention that, hey, what is our contingency plan? What else could happen here? What if, what if, what if? But in some environments that just made me so valuable, and other ones that made me feel like I was so negative. And I think that's part of our responsibility, particularly if you work in public relations. And to our medical metaphor earlier, it's right. We don't want to be treating people when they're in the ER and they've had a catastrophic issue. Like we want to be on the health and
Mhm.
wellness, like preventative, proactive side and trying to manage things before they become just catastrophic like that. And same thing.
What's the only thing your health insurance company gives you for free? Probably an annual checkup. Why? Because they know if you go for an annual checkup, preventive care, you catch things early, it costs them a lot less money, and it actually costs you a lot less in terms of anxiety and drama and fear and impact on your life and your family and all of those other things. So yeah, there's a lot to that preventive care model, getting ahead of things. I like to say, getting ahead of things at a point where you can just take a blood pressure pill or, eat more leafy greens and have a better diet, and you don't have to deal with a major cardiac crisis down the road.
Yes.
But so often organizations aren't thinking that way. And one of the most important aspects of this, and frankly, opportunities for organizations to build immunity to crises, to have fewer crises, has to do with values and getting the organization's values off the sides of coffee cups and off the about us page on the website where nobody ever sees them. Bring them out into the light where they can actually earn their keep by setting those values out. And leaders, have to lead in doing this, setting those values out as a decision framework for employees. What if employees at the end of a meeting or before even making a decision at their desks took 5 seconds to think, how could this go wrong? Is what I am about to do aligned with with the organization's values? Well, if you think through the organization's 4 or 5 values and you say, check, 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 go for it. But if somebody pauses and says, this one makes me a little bit uncomfortable, the yellow light goes on, they can go talk to somebody, they can go test the idea out with someone else. The whole thing is, how can you use those values as touchstones for decision making to the point where, they actually intercept a potential crisis before that step is taken, before that unforced error is committed. And, organizations are great at reciting their values. The really big question is what becomes of those values when something's hitting the fan.
Yes.
And, it's a choice. You can either default to your values and what you believe in an organization, but if those aren't embedded in the organization's culture and how decisions are made, organizations will default to profit and loss, dollars and cents, every time. And, think about what the potential outcome of that could be. You can make a lot of decisions in a crisis that may be penny wise, but reputationally foolish.
Yeah, and certainly are not long-term thinking, right? It's not the long game strategy that we talk about in public relations. I think you're right on, John. Like the values matter and having them guide you and make decisions, especially in noisy, chaotic times that are filled with pressure. Those values become principles. I know that when I found the principles of public relations that were set forth, over 100 years ago, like they still ring true as substantial and helpful for us to understand our roles as advisors. And they bring me comfort because I don't have to question how to act or behave in this circumstance. Same thing with my values as a person and the privilege I have to have my own company in which I say these values matter to me. And so they stand the test of time if you stand by them. And I think that's what's been very enlightening in the last few years is that particularly in this last year and a half where we've seen companies who say, "Oh, we care about DEI and we care about, this disenfranchised group of people and we care about this culture." And all of a sudden they're abandoned because they were feeling pressured, not to lose money by, new rules by a different administration. And that's not even me, Melissa, getting political. That's me pointing out we've seen such a hard shift in ways that I think we hadn't seen some big organizations take before. And but the tide will turn, right? The winds will shift
Right.
back and the ones who stood the test of time and stood by their values say, no, we still care about this. We always cared about this. We will care about this. Like the people will remember.
And,
And
and
that's
that is 100% true. Those are the companies that make decisions openly based on their values. You can always go and point back to why you did it, because this is what we believe, this is what we stand for. examples, lots of examples out there. One, Costco with
Mhm.
DEI, they came right out, and honestly, I wouldn't expect anything different from them. But they came right out and were not shy, were not afraid to say, we do this because it is good business. We know that we will not just have a stronger, better, more productive, more engaged workforce, but they are going to benefit financially, and so are we. It all comes back by following that value. It all comes back to the business.
Yeah.
And sometimes organizations get so hung up on protecting the balance sheet that they become blind to the fact that the right answer is actually right in front of them.
And stay in the course. That my word for the year this year is steady. And partly it was to just myself and my business and saying, stay the course, right?
Right.
It's a lot of headwinds, as we said earlier, but steady, right? Steady and trustworthy is going to win. And so, yeah, you're
Absolutely.
absolutely right. And to that point, Costco got put on people's radar and heart map in a significant way that maybe it hadn't been noticed for before. And I think
Right.
that's really important, right? You're not just thinking
hmm
of them for cheap toilet paper or diapers, right?
Well, yeah, and you have to consider that employees are going to be the first to call out any disconnects they spot between what executives are saying externally
Yeah.
and their lived experience in the organization. And, when you are guided by your values, you don't have to be concerned with that disconnect as much. It still can happen in some circumstances,
Mhm.
but when you have that consistent framework for guiding how you're seen, what you say, what you're seen to do externally, and what people see internally, you are at far less risk of having those disconnects and hypocrisy potentially called out.
Absolutely. And when you live and work that way, you're not having to look over your shoulder all the time. So I I just think that's a really smart way to keep it authentic and a little less worrisome for sure. Well, John,
Absolutely.
this is a great conversation, and I know you're going to have some, hopefully, good contacts after this, but not in the worst situations. But I just love this kind of discourse, and I just wanted to ask you, as I ask all my guests, like, what does smart talk, this concept of smart talk, mean to you?
Smart talk, maybe this isn't what you're looking for, but for me, smart talk is the product of just being willing and able and curious enough to look at things differently, to always look through different lenses, looking beyond the conventional wisdom, which is where we've come to building crisis immunity, not just crisis plans. Or, another topic, rethinking the conventional wisdom around dealing with online trolls, whether you feed or don't feed online trolls. Now, conventional wisdom says never feed the trolls. Well, it's not quite as cut and dried. And if you look at it, what is a troll anyway? And if you were to look under my desk, there is a 3-foot stack, literally, of um, peer-reviewed papers, research on the psychology of online trolls, the pathology of online trolls. It's not as cut and dried as you might think. Conventional wisdom says never feed them. Whether you feed them really depend or not depends on what they're hungry for. Um, and so that's just a different way of thinking about things, thinking, well, what's the reverse of this? Or if you're looking at a situation, what is the opportunity here that is counterintuitive, but is actually the smartest approach? And being able to surface those, being willing to raise those. And, I can't tell you how many times I've been with a board or a CEO or an executive team, and I'll put out a suggestion and they'll look at me like I have three heads. Are you absolutely insane? If we do that, our competitors are going to be all over it. And I'll stop, I'll say a few things and say, but what if by doing this, you're forcing your competitors to follow? They're not thinking that way, right? So being able to look at things through a different lens and being willing to put the challenge out there to an organization to do something differently that on its face for them, to them, it looks suicidal. But then when they wrap their heads around it, they realize that actually it's demonstrating integrity and leadership in a way that will drive their competitors to follow them. That, for me, that encapsulates what smart talk and smart thinking is all about.
Yeah, it sounds curious, it sounds innovative, it sounds civil. And I think we could use a lot more of that. So thanks, John. Well, this has been great, and you certainly are a great ally to have when times are good, John, but particularly when times are bad. I think you'd be such a good guide for troublesome waters. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
LinkedIn is great. Drop me an email. I'm pretty easy to find. It's Jon.Goldberg or just JON at reputationarchitects.com. Call me. Anachronistic and totally disarming to get a call from someone with an interesting question or an interesting challenge. How often does your phone ring, if you even have a landline in your office anymore? Admittedly, I still do. However you can find me, reach me. LinkedIn is a great place to start.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, John, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thanks, Melissa, for having me.
Thanks to our listeners for joining me for today's episode. We love covering communication topics that elevate our industry practice. If you'd like to go deeper, you can work with me as a coach, trainer, consultant, or hire my firm, MVW Communications, for strategic communication and public relations services. My industry books, Smart Talk Public Relations Essentials All Pros Should Know, and Latinas in Public Relations, Shaping Communications, Communities, and Culture, are also available for purchase on Amazon. Grab your copy there and please leave us a supportive review. Book reviews and podcast reviews help more aspiring or hardworking pros find our resources. As always, think smart and communicate smart. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Smart Talk series. If you learned something or enjoyed our conversation, share it on social media or send to a friend. To learn more about this and other communication topics, visit mvw360.com. That's mvw360.com.